Hello. As we move into Act 2 and get ready to dive into the movies, I wanted to take some time to introduce you to the concepts that I want you to explore as you watch the movies. As you'll notice, we've got four options, as we always do, for the movies you'll watch. You only have to pick three, but you could always watch the fourth. Another quick note about why these videos are chopped up into the different pieces. And there are actually three reasons. One is that I think it'll probably be a little more digestible and easier for you. You can break your viewing up into smaller pieces. Makes it a little bit easier for me too. If I mess it up, I don't have to worry about being 35 minutes in and having to re-record all that. But really, most importantly, the software that I found that makes it easiest to record and facilitates it for you only allows me to record for 5 minutes. So that said, there will be four concepts or four areas that I'm going to ask you to think about for each of the 3 or 4 movies you watch. One of those is neural communication. It relates to the neural system, which includes these tiny little building blocks called neurons that actually manage to communicate within our body. They communicate in an electrical and in a chemical fashion. I want you to understand that whole process, but we're going to focus even more on the chemical part, the neurotransmitter part. In Thumbsucker, there's a beautiful animated depiction of neurotransmitter communication. The depiction might not be entirely 100% accurate with what we'd see in the biology, but it really gives an idea of the concept. For that and the remaining movies too, I want you to think about the role of neural communication in the various characters' behavior. You might check out that table on page 53 to think about the specific neurotransmitters and how they would be affecting behavior at any point in time. The second piece that we're going to look at from that biological set of influences is the endocrine system. And the endocrine system is also related to communication within the body, but in a little bit different way. It works a little bit more slowly through hormones, which are released into the bloodstream. Those hormones are generated by glands, and each of which has a sort of a specific function or a specific job within the body. And of course, the biological components are going to be obviously displayed. It's like the characters did this or did that. They were alive. The biologicals at play. But I want you to think a little bit more deeply in terms of the specific glands and how they would function in different situations to affect the character's behavior. From another perspective, we can also think about some social influences on behavior, including this idea that we attribute the behavior of others to one thing or another. In other words, we want to figure out why somebody did that. What made them do that? Sometimes we make errors in our conclusions. We say they did it because of that, or they did it because they're a bad person, when in fact it was because they were in a bad situation, otherwise known as the fundamental attribution error. Our desire to figure out why a person did something, and then that tendency to make an error, has got a number of implications. It can make a big impact on the way we think about people. So I want you to think about that through 2 lenses as you watch the movie. One perspective is, how do the different characters view one another? Charlie Bartlett in particular includes a really interesting depiction of attribution theory in Charlie's relationship and interactions with the principal. The other consideration is, how do we think about the characters? How do we attribute the behavior of the characters? And the main character in Down to the Bone might particularly challenge you to stop and think about your thinking. The other characters in both Savages and Thumbsuckers gives us a similar opportunity to examine our thinking, examine the attributions we make. Another social consideration is attitudes and actions. Attitudes are feelings that just predispose us to respond in a particular way, whether we're responding to an object, to a person, to events. It's often influenced by our beliefs. That response means that there's a relationship between attitude and actions, and it's reciprocal in both ways. Definitely please review that material in the textbook about how attitudes and actions reflect one another. One particular consideration as you think about the movies is whether or not the different characters really seem to behave in a way that's consistent with what our textbook discusses. Another consideration, especially with Thumbsucker and Charlie Bartlett, which feature adolescence characters, is how that role-playing idea that the book talks about in the context of attitudes and actions might interact with some of what we understand about development, which I'll talk about here shortly. Thanks for tuning in, and I will be back with you in the next installment.